I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. My theme today is, Can we be honest about inequality? In last week's video, I mentioned John Gormley's question to his female Facebook friends, do women want to be treated equally? And I noted that the question of women's capacities, physical and intellectual, has become a forbidden subject in polite society today, leading to much dishonesty and double talk. As I contemplated my answer to John's question, I thought immediately of two areas in which I could not be held to the same standard as men: strength and physical courage. I'm long past the gym-going days, but when I did used to do weight training 15 years ago, before I realized it made me bulkier rather than trimmer, it didn't take acute powers of observation to note that even men who were thinner and lighter than I were significantly stronger. Although there are a few remarkably strong women, in general, women are not as strong as men. Which leads to the focus of my talk today: women in traditionally all-male occupations, particularly the military. Over the past few years, there's been a lot of talk in Canada and the United States about the position of women in the armed forces. And it's one of the public conversations in which the flagrant hypocrisy of mainstream feminist orthodoxy is starkly revealed. 2 years ago, the Canadian military was held up to much public scrutiny for failing to meet its gender and race targets. Having tried and been unable to bring women to 25% of military personnel, and worried that the Canadian Human Rights Commission might impose conditions on the forces to meet these targets, the Defense Department requested of the Canadian government that the gender target be reduced to 17.6% as a more manageable goal. Well, the politically correct press immediately voiced an aggrieved protest. The Huffington Post's Rachel DeCoste called the statement by the Canadian forces, quote, a stunning admission of failure. And she claimed, with a great sense of having clinched the argument, that, quote, the Canadian forces are essentially giving up on including the majority of the people they claim to be defending. Note the snideness of that phrase, claim to be defending, as if those mostly rural and small-town white guys who have died in Afghanistan don't really deserve our gratitude because not enough women like DeCoste have been encouraged to join up. DeCoste assumes without any reasons that it is inarguably a good thing that a military force be representative of the people it claims to be defending. Well, I can maybe see that argument being applied, only maybe, in a field like teaching, where it may be good for kids, other things being equal, to have teachers who are representative of the national population. But in the military? Nonsense. There are all sorts of people who are not represented in the Canadian military: the very old, children, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and a lot of wusses like me who literally can't bear the sight of blood, who couldn't carry a fallen soldier from the battlefield or engage with enemy combatants if my life depended on it. Defending a population has nothing to do with representing that population in the ranks, and it would be disastrous if it did. More on this later. DeCoste's bedrock assumption, like that of many other feminist commentators, is that the Canadian military is keeping a lot of qualified and willing women out of its ranks, mainly by its failure to clean up the supposedly rampant problem of sexual harassment and abuse that makes the military so unwelcoming for women. Of course, these are the same people who claim that university campuses are insidious rape cultures, and that sure isn't keeping female students away. The question of women's fitness for the military is never raised by DeCoste, though from any logical point of view it would seem unavoidable. Women comprise roughly 14% of the Canadian military, and of these only a very small fraction are in combat roles. In other words, in the area that most fundamentally reflects the armed forces' purpose to defend and protect Canadians, women account for only a tiny percentage. A mere glance at the number of casualties in the Afghanistan conflict points up the reality of what Lacoste and her feminist friends would call patriarchal privilege. Male deaths in combat vastly outnumber those of women. Of the 158 soldiers who have been killed to date, only 3 of them, or less than 2%, were female. So why are women so poorly represented on the front lines? Because most women can't do the job, don't want to do the job, and in cases where they can do it, can't do it as well as men. In 2012, a post-media report tried to deny this fact, arguing that Canadian women were taking an equal role in the Afghan conflict. The evidence brought forward for this preposterous claim was the sad death of Captain Nicola Goddard, killed in a Taliban ambush, the first Canadian female soldier killed in a combat role. Make no mistake, I honor Nicola Goddard's sacrifice. She's a more courageous woman than I, and I admire her love for her country and her incredible service. But it still has to be said, a woman getting killed on the battlefield proves nothing about women's military ability overall, despite the exaggerated statement that, quote, the Afghan mission proved once and for all that women can tackle any job as well as their male counterparts. The article went on to admit that more military women than men suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. But the author explained these away as owing to the additional pressure women experienced in the military, quote, due to their minority status and stereotyping. We're to believe that the stress of stereotyping is worse even than that of being targeted by an enemy trying to kill you. Well, none of this was true, and a recent American study has demonstrated a big disparity in women's and men's battlefield ability. The U.S. Marine Corps examined over a year the impact of female integration on combat readiness and found conclusively that women cannot match male performance. Male units were faster, more effective, and able to evacuate casualties in less time. Overall, the study concluded all male squads performed better than mixed groups in 69% of the tasks evaluated. Women performed notably less well in their use of every individual weapon system, and in addition, women had higher injury rates than men. So in terms of women's own well-being, as well as the overall effectiveness of the fighting force, its ability to kill enemies and save wounded comrades, the study showed that the presence of women in combat units has a negative impact. This isn't about an ideal of egalitarianism, a desire to have a military force that looks like the wider population. This is the serious business of not putting military forces personnel in harm's way. This is about winning rather than losing wars. The fact that ability isn't the first thing everybody mentions when discussing women in the armed forces demonstrates how deeply the rot of feminist egalitarianism has eaten into the fabric of our society. I, for one, don't want to live in an egalitarian society. I want to live in a merit-based society. I want exceptional women to have the chance to succeed, to contribute their gifts. But I do not want a fake equality established by government dictate. And I'm tired of hearing from women and their feminist allies about how we have to do more to make sure women succeed. Men have always paid the bigger price and contributed more as a class to the protection and technological development of civilization than women. And in the tolerant, humane society we created in the West, men often allowed women to forget that fact. It is appropriate and just for women to remember it.